followed by the pound.
After the tone, please state your name.
Welcome to today's webinar, Race Ethnicity Matters When Recruiting and Retaining Undergraduate Women Engineers, presented by Elizabeth Litzler. My name is Greg Nagy, and I am the Virtual Learning Community Manager from The Ohio State University, who provides technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline project. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1 hour and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the stemequitypipeline.org website. As you've already found out, you will be watching the presenter present slides through the live meeting interface while listening to them talk over your phone. If you cannot get the live meeting software to work today, you can download today's slides from the home page of the stemequitypipeline.org website and follow along using your phone. All the attendees' phones have been automatically muted. The presenter will answer questions after the presentation. However, we can take questions at any time. This is how we take questions. At any time during the presentation and during the Q&A, you may submit a question by clicking on the button labeled Q&A at the top left of your live meeting window. Type in your question and click the Ask button. The presenter or I will read and respond to these questions at the end of the presentation. You can download today's slides from the handout icon at the top right of your live meeting window. We also have a couple other handouts in there as well. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Mimi Lufkin, CEO, National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity and STEM Equity Pipeline Project Director. Mimi?
Thank you, Greg. Good morning to all of you, those of you who are to the west of us and midday to the remainder. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to this exceptional webinar with Liz from Washington, University of Washington. First of all, we always like to know who's on today's webinar, and one way we do that is through a polling process, just to make sure that we get an understanding of how you all heard about today's webinar. So if you could just go ahead and answer the poll and let us know whether you heard about this from the listserv, from some other listserv besides the one that we send out, whether it was forwarded from a colleague, presentation at a conference, announcement in our pipeline press, or announcement in some other newsletter, or possibly from the website. I'm going to go ahead and open the results so you can see as they come in where people are responding. And again, it sounds like our listserv tends to be probably our best avenue for doing outreach for these types of activities, so this is good feedback. I'm going to wait just a couple minutes and or 1 minute maybe or less, and let a few more of you respond. But it still looks like that the listserv is the winning outreach avenue. Even if a bunch of you voted, you're all still voting up there. So I think that probably takes care of it, and it looks like we know, again, that the listserv tends to be a great avenue for us. At every webinar, we always give a very brief overview of the project, just to highlight this for some of you who may be new here. But the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity Education Foundation received a grant from the National Science Foundation in 2007. And this grant is from the Gender in Science and Engineering program at NSF. The goals of this particular project are specifically about building the capacity of educators to provide high-quality professional development on gender equity and STEM. And in the states in which we're working, we work on integrating the research on gender equity and STEM into teacher professional development through a variety of mechanisms depending on the way the states are set up. We also connect this work to existing accountability systems, particularly the two non-traditional measures in the career and technical education legislation, but certainly other accountability in regards to student achievement and academic preparation in the Elementary Secondary Education Act and other federal laws. And lastly, we like to broaden the commitment to gender equity. We do a variety of outreach activities nationally as well as in states to ensure that this agenda gets placed in lots of places besides those institutions where we're directly doing work. The way in which we do this work is multiple methods, but primarily we provide professional development and teacher training in pilot sites in schools as well as through professional development mechanisms in the states that we're working in. We provide consulting and technical assistance to the pilots as well as to state leadership teams that are providing professional development in their state. And we also do lots of virtual web-based professional learning. For example, we have an online course that's currently being offered through Open New Hampshire, which is a professional development online program in one of our partner states in New Hampshire. It's available to anyone in the country. You can find information about it on the STEM Equity Pipeline website. And we also, of course, have these webinars that we conduct regularly. So how can you get involved? If you happen to be from any one of these particular states, California, Georgia, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Texas, Wisconsin, and most recently Idaho, just got added about 2 weeks ago, go to the virtual learning community at stemequitypipeline.org and click on the state teams page, and you can find out who the state contact is in that area in order to find out more about what's going on in your state. So in preparation for today's webinar, I'm going to ask you to complete one more poll, and this one we do specifically to help our presenter to identify who happens to be on the call. So if you could tell us who you are, if you're a school, college administrator, or a teacher, faculty member, a counselor, student services staff, state agency person, someone from a STEM organization, or an other, and you'll notice it says Q&A there, the idea being if you wanted to let us know who you are as the other category by just responding in the Q&A box. That also helps us get a better sense of who happens to be on the call, and the presenter can also take a look at that as well. So it looks like we have a lot of administrators on today's call who I hope will pass this information on to faculty because I think there's some really interesting teacher-based information in this particular webinar. And all of you in the other category, if some of you could let us know what you do, that would help us as well. So, all right. Well, without further ado, I think I'm going to, I'll show you the results quickly here so you can see. I think I am. It's not wanting to respond. Greg, oh, there we go. Results are shown. So 37% of you say you're scholars or school administrators, and about the same amount indicate others. So we have lots of other people on today's call. So Liz, I don't know that that's going to help you very much, but maybe it looks like we've got some Q&A responses. You could check those, and we can see who they are. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now and let you know that you will receive a survey at the end of today's webinar that will come as a separate email with a link, and I'd like to ask you all please to complete that survey. It's the evaluation for today's webinar, and if you happen to be viewing this as an archived webinar, because we are recording this today, if you can refer back to your registration email, and there should be a link with a confirmation number. You'll also receive an email from Greg Nagy, who's our webinar coordinator, as a follow-up whenever archived webinars are viewed, so that you can also evaluate today's webinar. So let's just get right to it. I'd like to introduce to you Elizabeth Litzler from the University of Washington. Elizabeth is the Director of Research at the University of Washington Center for Workforce Development. Her research interests include the educational climate for undergraduate and graduate students and gender stratification in education and the workforce. Most recently, she is the co-author of a piece of research called Intersections of Gender and Race in Engineering Education, and I'm looking forward to Liz's sharing with us the results of this particular work. Liz.
Thank you, Mimi. So as Mimi said, my name is Liz Litzler, and I'm so pleased to be sharing my work with you today. And thank you to the NAEP STEM Equity Pipeline for giving me this opportunity. So before I get started, I want to make sure I thank my co-authors that were on the paper that this presentation is mostly based upon, Preeti Modi-Pan and Dr. Suzanne Brainerd. Also, I want to thank the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for funding this project and all of the 22 schools that have participated in the Project to Assess Climate and Engineering, or PACE. The focus of this presentation is on women studying engineering in the undergraduate academic environment, really about the need to recognize that changes are needed in engineering classrooms, the need to think about women as a diverse group, and what we know is that engineering students are typically studied with little attention paid to the intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender. So that's kind of why we need to do this. With that in mind, I just want to share with you my objectives. You may have seen these in the email you received. But what I want you to do is to take away an understanding of the overall trends for women in engineering. Understand that women's experiences vary by race and ethnicity, and take away an understanding of what types of interventions could improve the representation of underrepresented groups in STEM. All the results that I'm going to talk to you about today come from the Project to Assess Climate in Engineering, or the PACE study. This is a mixed method study at 22 engineering schools across the nation, and it involved an online in-depth survey and face-to-face interviews. The analysis of the quantitative survey data are used in this presentation. I'm not going to talk about the qualitative data today. But the results really provide us with an unprecedented opportunity to examine the undergraduate experience in engineering. So 22 schools, institutions were involved in PACE, but the data from 21 schools is what I'm going to talk about today, as those are the schools that have usable survey data. So to give you a sense, the participating schools are generally large. They're land-grant, highly ranked schools. They're public, and they also, mostly 57%, a majority, have very high research activity. That's the RUVH, it's a Carnegie classification. And also, while the 21 PACE schools represent only 6% of the engineering schools in the U.S., they account for 18% of all full-time engineering undergraduate enrollments nationwide in 2008. That suggests that a significant proportion of engineering students nationwide experience the environments that have been examined in this study. So that helps us understand sort of the breadth of it. So real quick, for the 2008 online survey, just so you know, the students were sampled using a stratified random sample with oversamples of women and underrepresented minorities. A total of 10,554 students responded to the survey, and the response rates at the individual institutions ranged quite a bit, actually, from a low of 7% to a high of 52%. So the overall mean is around 29% response rate. This gives you a sense of the demographics of the survey, and this is what I find to be, what is great about PACE. And that's that, over 10,000 students responded and told us both their race and their gender. And as you can see, the table really shows a large number of students in certain underrepresented categories. So respondents included 373 African American students, 139 Native American, over 1,200 Hispanic Americans. All this enables us to really do analyses that weren't really possible before in engineering specifically. And you can also see that 45% of the respondents identified as female, and that clearly shows our oversampling process worked, because that's definitely lower than the percentage that are in engineering today. So what's the situation for women in engineering at the national level? I don't know that these particular statistics are often shared because they look at it from a little bit of a different direction. We know overall that women are, in engineering total, are about 18% of all students in engineering. But this chart shows you the percentage of engineering bachelor's degrees granted to women from any given race. So that dotted line there is the total, which I just mentioned, 18% in the most recent year. But if we look at the red line, what that red line really means, that's the line for African Americans at the very top. It shows us that of all the African Americans who received engineering bachelor's degrees in 1996, a little over 35% were women. It also shows us that the proportion of African Americans receiving degrees who are women has declined over the past 15 years or so. So you can get a sense here of that even in terms of outcomes, so this is engineering bachelor's degrees granted are generally something we think of as an outcome. There are differences among the different race and ethnicities that we're looking at here today. So you can see that women are better represented among those of their race receiving engineering bachelor's degrees. And I'd also note that the volatility that you see in that dark blue line for Native Americans is probably more likely to be due to the small numbers that are in that group, so any increase or decrease is going to show some volatility in terms of percentages. So this gives you some sense of the overall trends in terms of women's representation in engineering by race and ethnicity. So why should you care about this research? Women in general are often thought of as a group, sort of as a monolith in some ways. We talk about women, but we don't say which race or ethnicity we're talking about. We just sort of talk about all women together and assume they all have similar perceptions and experiences and beliefs. But that's not really what I'll show you today. That's not really the best way to think about it. The analogy that comes to mind for me is that in the current literature, we sort of see what's this first picture here. It's two parallel roads. The literature tends to examine women and ethnic minorities separately, and it ignores the interdependent relationship between race and gender. And what we really need is research that looks a little bit more like these roads in the second picture. So they're intersecting, they're connecting at different angles. They show us the diversity of what can exist. When I look at the second picture, I really get a good sense of that there are so many opportunities in a world like that, so many opportunities for research and for interventions in a more complex picture like that. Unfortunately, due to extremely small sample sizes in much of the research that's been done in the past, and thus the inability to disaggregate, this is a major obstacle for research on the intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender. And we know that the numbers and the percentage of women in engineering has been relatively stagnant over time. So what we really need to think about are other ways to look at this issue, and examining the intersection of gender and race ethnicity on the lived experiences of STEM students is our strategy. It's the way we're strategic about trying to understand this trend. So women from underrepresented groups are in sort of unique situations in engineering or in many STEM fields overall. I should note that while I talk about engineering, I think this is highly relevant for many STEM fields. So they're in the minority, the quote-unquote minority, by virtue of their gender and their race or ethnic identity. And some researchers consider this dual minority status to be a double bind or a double jeopardy or double disadvantage. And I've listed some of the authors there that talk about these ideas. More recently, some other researchers, particularly Hansen, has been examining how attributes of certain underrepresented racial backgrounds might actually offer advantages to female students in STEM fields. So the idea is that the role of culture and family attributes may actually help women to pursue STEM, and that we need to understand this a little bit better. So this is just some of the literature here that's been cited about the women of color in STEM, and clearly is relevant to the work that we're doing. So what do we know about women's experiences in engineering overall? The literature tells us very clearly that women as a whole, again, experience engineering differently than men, that they have different perceptions and different reactions to the environment. And study after study, in fact, of many, many years, has been highlighting the challenges that are faced uniquely by women relative to men. And you all may know some of this information, but I just want to go over one of the key findings that's repeated over and over in the literature is that compared to men, women have lower self-confidence, lower perceived ability and self-reliance, even though we know that their grade point averages are equal to or higher than those of men. We also know that self-confidence goes down quite a bit for women in engineering during the first year in college, and it never really climbs back up to that initial level where it was. On some of these slides, I want to note that I'm including some citations at the very bottom so that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about these findings, you can go and check those out. So in addition, we know that women who earned engineering degrees found their courses more difficult and less enjoyable, and that they're more uncomfortable participating in class and more uncomfortable participating in labs than men. And they're more successful in the classroom than they are in their labs, one of the findings there. But clearly, this research, we're talking still about women as a whole, and so we're still missing a piece of what is happening with students. That missing piece is really knowing how engineering women's classroom experiences vary by race and ethnicity. So this is really, we're getting to the meat of the presentation here. So what we want to do is explore the differences and similarities that exist between women of different race and ethnic groups, and specifically with respect to their perceptions and their engagement with faculty and in classrooms. This is where students begin and or sometimes end their engineering careers as they're put in uncomfortable situations and they might leave their majors. So this is a revised version of a table that comes from a 2010 ASEE conference paper. I'm not going to dig into this too much, but I wanted to sort of show you some of the results of this paper focusing on women by race and ethnicity. So this table shows us gender differences. It's comparing men and women again, but we're comparing within 3 different race and ethnic categories. So what we see is that in this first column here, we see that there are no gender differences between African American men and women in engineering. We see a couple of gender differences among Hispanics. We see, in particular, Hispanic women are less comfortable asking questions in class and less confident in their ability to succeed in their engineering courses relative to Hispanic men. And we see the greatest number of gender differences among white males and females. So among whites, we see that gender differences in each of these 3 groups, the professor-student interaction, student-student interaction, the confidence, those 3 areas all have some gender difference that comes along. But if let me just tell you that they're not all negative. They're not all that women are at a deficit in this situation. So white women are more likely than white men to indicate that their professors usually or all the time care about whether they learn the course material. White women are more likely to feel that they're part of an engineering community, usually or all the time. They think that other students take their comments and suggestions in class seriously most of the time. And they also think that students help them succeed, usually or all the time. So you can see here that most of the differences that we're seeing are among the white women and the white men, gender differences. And so that makes you think about, well, when we're talking just about women, is this, you know, we sort of have the sense that that's who we're talking about, is really about white women, and so women from underrepresented groups end up getting kind of marginalized and lost. So it's important that we look at women of different race and ethnicities. This next analysis comes from our 2011 ASEE conference paper, and in it we analyzed the responses from women in 5 different race and ethnic groups. In total, in this analysis, there were 4,009 females. This is looking only at females. We're not doing gender differences here. We want to know specifically how women of different race and ethnicities differ from one another. You can see the numbers. It's pretty decent numbers. Native American is our smallest group at 53, but even that is a pretty good number, you know, for a bivariate type analysis like we're going to do today. So this shows you the PACE data are really unique because of the large number of underrepresented minorities in it that answer the survey. And that really enables us to do analysis by race and ethnic group. And that's not really common in engineering studies. So we're looking at classroom experiences and engagement with faculty. And for this particular paper, we looked at 7 different variables. The first 2 are factors that we created via factor analysis. So comfortable is what we call the first one, and it's a factor that combines questions regarding the extent to which students meet with their professors for extra help, the extent to which students are comfortable meeting with them, and comfortable asking questions in class in general. Good teachers is a factor that combines questions from a lot of different items. It combines a lot of different items on the survey, including that professors encourage students to think creatively, that professors care whether or not students learn the course material, that professors inspire students or write helpful comments on homework, they take student suggestions seriously, they grade the work fairly, that the quality of teaching is high, etc. This is a factor that was created from a very large number of items. And then we have 5 single items that come directly from the survey. Professors' respect is a question that measures the extent to which students think their professors treat them with respect, And then we have 4 questions that are all about stereotypes and feeling singled out or feeling like they've been singled out. So these questions ask whether students felt unfairly singled out, and this is in class specifically because of their gender, because of their race. And the response categories on this on the original questionnaire was actually yes, no, unsure. But for this analysis, we only look at those students who said yes or no. The unsure category is not super large, and that's another, we have looked at that a little bit in other research, but we're just going to talk about the folks who said yes and no today. So for the analysis, we chose to compare each of the 5 groups to each other. We thought that doing this would provide a more enlightening view of what was happening. I think often we end up using one reference group to compare folks, and that's where we lose all the complexity. So all the analyses in this are bivariate at this point, since so little is known about the differences between women of different race and ethnicities. And we used t-test or chi-square statistics depending on the level of measurement of the item of interest. So let's get to some results here. I'm going to show you some charts here rather than tables of numbers because I think it helps to see the bigger story. But please note that not all of the groups are significantly different from each other. There aren't, not all the differences are statistically significant. So I'll try and point out the ones that I think are most important. So recall that comfortable is a factor and it has a mean of 0. So when we look at the degree to which women are comfortable meeting with their professors and asking questions in class, we see that African American women and Native American women have vastly different experiences from each other. African American women are more likely to indicate that they are comfortable asking questions in class and meeting with professors than women of every other race and ethnicity. So the differences are statistically significant for every group. On the other hand, Native American women indicate that they are less likely to feel comfortable meeting with professors and asking questions in class than women of every other race and ethnicity as well. The findings regarding the perception that professors are good teachers, that is that they inspire, that they care about student learning, they're fair, they encourage creativity, etc. The findings here are a little bit less stark than for comfort. What we see is that African American women and Asian American women have a similar low opinion of the quality of their teachers. There's actually no significant difference between Asian American women and African American women on this question. Similarly, we see that Native American women and Hispanic women are also, they're not statistically different from one another, but they share an opinion about the quality of teaching is better. And you can't, tell this from these charts. It's only in the tables. But for white women are actually more similar to Hispanic and Native American women on this measure. They have a higher opinion about the quality of teaching. And then respect. This is professors respect students, and what we get is, this is a reminder, this is a single item measure on a 5-point scale, so that's why this scale looks very different. The biggest difference that we see between women of different race and ethnicities regarding the extent to which they think that professors treat students with respect is really between Hispanic women and almost every other race and ethnicity. That's the main difference that we see. There are some other small differences between certain other groups, but I don't want to get into those because I don't think that's the main story here. And it would take us too far afield of the main story, I guess. Now we get to the questions about stereotypes and being singled out because of their gender. And I just want to, as a reminder, I want to tell you what these survey items say on the survey again so that you can recall sort of what they might mean. So the statements, students were asked to respond to the following statements. In class, I have heard professors express stereotypes about men and women. In class, I have been singled out unfairly because of my gender. In class, I have heard professors express stereotypes about racial and ethnic groups. And in class, I have been singled out unfairly because of my race ethnicity. There are very few statistical differences on the gender questions. Asian American women, and I kind of put an arrow there to point those out, Asian American women are less likely than white women to have heard faculty express gender stereotypes. Asian American women are also less likely than white women and African American women to indicate that they were singled out in class because of their gender. But I think part of the bigger picture here is just looking at sort of where the percentages lie. So overall, all of these percentages are much closer in magnitude to one another than they are on the race ethnicity questions. And for many of these groups, more than 20% of women are indicating that they've experienced this. On both of the questions about race and ethnicity, African American women are significantly more likely than almost every other racial group to indicate that they've heard racial and ethnic stereotypes from faculty, and they report being singled out because of their race or ethnicity. The percentage is almost 20%. I mean, it's just slightly less than that in each case. I also find it interesting, we did another analysis where we sort of combined these two race ethnicity questions together so that anyone who said yes to either one became a yes on the combined question. And what that found was that 30% of African American women, 27.8% is the exact amount, have experienced one or the other situation, and that's a huge proportion, in my opinion. So on the next few slides, what I'm going to do is try and summarize these findings for you in a different way, one that hopefully elucidates the bigger picture of the differences in experiences between women of different race and ethnicities. So what we find is that African American women express the highest level of comfort with professors and asking questions in class, and that was compared to all other races and ethnicities. Along with Asian American women, they expressed the lowest opinion of the quality of teachers. They expressed a lower opinion than Hispanic women on the extent to which professors treat students with respect. And they expressed a greater likelihood of hearing racial ethnic stereotypes and being singled out because of their race. I think it shows us a pretty clear story there. Hispanic American women ranked sort of in the middle in terms of their comfort asking questions in class. They were ranked relatively high in terms of their opinions of the quality of their teachers. And they expressed the highest opinion that professors treat them with respect, and that's compared to all other female groups. Native American women expressed the lowest level of comfort with professors and asking questions in class. They had a higher opinion of the quality of teachers, however, and there was really no difference on the extent to which they felt that professors treated students with respect. Asian American women ranked in the middle in terms of their comfort asking questions in class. Along with African American women, they expressed the lowest opinion of the quality of teaching. They were less likely to feel that professors treat them with respect. And they're less likely to say that they've heard gender stereotypes from professors or to feel singled out because of their gender. White women were ranked in the middle in terms of their comfort asking questions in class. They had a higher opinion that professors are good teachers, and they ranked in the middle in terms of feeling that professors treat them with respect. So I think the results here are pretty clear that women of different race and ethnicities experience the engineering environment in unique ways. The results, I think, also suggest that culture plays a role in female student adjustment to an environment in which they're underrepresented. And this may not be a double negative. So in some ways, some of this supports the findings of Hansen that I mentioned earlier, that there may be something about certain backgrounds that provides or results in some sort of protective barrier or protective background. The results also suggest that women are clearly in an environment in engineering and in other STEM disciplines, likely, where gender and racial stereotypes are activated. And given that this analysis was only bivariate, it's really clear that there are a lot of next steps for this research. And we plan to continue doing engineering education research into the possible role of culture and the intersection of race and ethnicity and gender. But I think there's a step that we haven't talked about yet, which is what can you do to improve the environment for women in STEM? What can you do based on learning this information? How can this impact what you do in your daily lives? One of the things that our findings, because our findings are really all about the classroom environment, one of the things that's really clear that needs to be worked on is faculty or teacher-student interaction. So the stereotype threat, unconscious bias, unexamined bias, implicit bias, these are some of the key terms that have been gaining a lot of traction in recent years. And I've noticed actually that that the STEM Equity Pipeline has already had a few webinars on some of these topics. So you may already have a sense of this information. There's some really great research out there by Joshua Aronson, Claude Steele, and Catherine Good. I believe you actually heard from Catherine Good in one of your webinars. And I'd like to point you to some best practices and some other information. I'm not sure if these have been shared with you before, but there's a great website called Reducing Stereotype Threat that was created by two social psychology professors. And it has a lot of different information on there. There's also some promising practices. The National Center for Women in IT and Information Technology, that's ncwit.org, has a lot of resources available on their website. And the JPEG that I posted here is one that specifically deals with stereotype threat. And so it gives you a sense of sort of what is the research on this, and then what can you do? What's a case study of what's been done to work on the issue? But if you haven't checked them out, they have other promising practices for K through 12, undergraduate, graduate, and career level arenas. Organizations can also work to facilitate increased student engagement through improving and increasing student-faculty interaction. And this is especially important during the first 2 years in engineering because that's when the majority of students leave the major. So retaining them is key during those first 2 years. And one intervention as an example of increasing faculty-student interaction that's well known to be beneficial to students is REUs, or research experiences for undergraduates. Organizations can also provide opportunities for faculty professional development, especially in areas that are related to effective student interaction. This is harder to do, I think, at certain types of institutions that don't value teaching as much as research, but I think it's equally important, if not more important, to do these sorts of things at those types of schools, although it may be difficult. So finally, I'd like to bring up a few questions that one might think about when considering interventions. First, think about, do the activities that foster community, the activities you're implementing to foster community, do they actually support women of color? So women of color might participate in women's groups like Women in Science and Engineering or Women in Engineering, and they might participate also in minority groups like there's MSEP programs. But they may not really feel like they fully belong in either of those groups. And so thinking about how to make those groups very welcoming to women of different race and ethnicities. Also, how does this work, this research, really help us to understand the role of culture in the success of women in STEM? So what are students bringing into the classroom with them that can help us understand what they need? They've been raised in certain ways. They've been socialized in certain ways, and so they're bringing into the classroom a background that we don't always know, but we can get some sense of, and that may really help us to understand why certain groups are more successful in completing engineering degrees or STEM degrees. And the last question here is, how can we work both top-down and bottom-up? So I kind of say this because, as you all know, we can't get all teachers or all of our faculties or to change the way that they do things. That's just not the way academic systems generally work. So when a culture or a climate is chilly to women or to underrepresented minorities, we do have to provide support for students. That's the bottom-up part of this. But changing the culture and climate really should be our primary focus, and that needs to happen both top-down and bottom-up. I think organizations can signal to teachers and faculty where their values lie by making it clear that improving the culture and the climate is a value, it's a priority, and by doing that, organizational leadership can encourage change in their institutions. I think for those not in leadership positions, there are things that can be done to share knowledge about appropriate classroom practices with colleagues. I've heard of some faculty taking a resource sheet or a practice sheet or something like that and putting it in the mailboxes of their colleagues with a little personal note telling them how it was useful to themselves or to you. Or bringing a particular practice up at a staff or faculty meeting, something where you can spread the word. One person doing great work is wonderful. More people doing great work is even better, of course. So I'm happy to answer questions, and if participants have ideas about sort of what they feel are the most important next steps for research in this area, that's something I'd love to get folks' ideas about, especially because I think the audience of this webinar, based on the poll that Mimi did, is a slightly different audience than the people that I normally talk to. So if you have ideas about next steps for research or anything about sort of where this type of work can go, I'd love if you could put those things into the Q&A menu that's within the webinar, that Q&A tab on the top. So,
Liz,
yeah.
Liz, this is Freda Walker, and to the rest of the group, I'm the Assistant Director to the STEM Equity Pipeline Project, and I'm going to be asking the questions that people have posted. So I'm going to just do them in the order that people posted them, so it follows a little bit as your presentation went along. And this is the first question. Are your survey questions available for other researchers to use?
Right now, the survey, the PACE survey has been, we actually were recently refunded by the Sloan Foundation to run the survey again at the same institutions where we did it back in 2008. So in 2012, we'll be rerunning that survey, and I think once we rerun it, we'll be publishing on that as well to assess changes over time in those organizations. And I think what we'd like to do is be able to share some of those questions. And we have some indices we've created from the questions, some factors that combine multiple questions into sort of one main concept that enable, different kinds of analyses. And I think the more people who can study this, in similar ways so that we can compare across groups, the better.
Okay, and that makes me think also maybe there are some people out there that would like to participate in some of your survey if you're refunded. Would they just contact you if they had an interest? I mean, you know, if they had a university or an engineering program in their area and wanted you to consider them?
That's a good question. Right now, I think I'm not sure that we have enough funding from Sloan to include more than the original 22, but if we do have some dropouts of schools, it might be possible to include them. So I think it would be definitely worth an email to me or to the executive director here, Suzanne Brainerd, to talk about whether that's a possibility. I don't know that we'd be able to include a lot of schools, but we wouldn't be able to do the same kind of analysis that we're going to do for the set that we're doing. You know, it's not a longitudinal, but it's a change over time analysis, you know?
Okay.
Because it'd be only at one point for those new schools.
Okay, well, thank you. And this is question number 2, and it's a little bit long. There seems to be some contradiction between the stats on the subgroups responding to the rate of experiences with stereotypes in class, their perception of good teachers, and their comfort with asking questions in class, namely African Americans, and maybe another group anyway, and their comfort in class and the quality of teachers. How can their ranking of good teachers be when their perceptions of stereotypes be significant? Do you understand?
I don't think I fully understand it, but I think
that they're ranking good teachers, you know, and yet they have perceptions of stereotypes happening, you know, to them.
So what we see for the good teachers is that African American women actually have the lowest opinion of good teachers. So to me that's actually not contradictory. I think that kind of fits with the idea that, you know, if you're hearing stereotypes, racial and ethnic stereotypes or gender stereotypes from your teacher, that might be less, that might give you a perception that your teacher might be a little biased in certain ways.
And so how is it then, the next question is, how is it then that they feel comfortable to ask questions in class?
Oh, so that might have more to do with culture. So that there are things, especially for African American women, that the culture that they come from, and there's some work on this by Patricia Hill Collins and Angela Davis and some others about, you know, the strong female figure in African American family life, and that may carry over to the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Question number 3, was the data broken out by field of study, such as mechanical engineering or civil engineering, etc.? Some disciplines have greater chance of women, and thus the environment may be different.
Yes. So in the research I described today, those papers, we did not break it out by the field of study. However, we have done other research where we have broken it out. So actually, my dissertation was particularly studying gender segregation within engineering fields of study. So looking at the differences among those fields of study and understanding what is associated with those differences. So if someone is interested in that, I'd encourage them to please contact me, and I'd be happy to share those results.
Okay, thank you. Question number 4, how do you think these findings would change for community college students?
So one thing we know about community colleges is that they're often, the students are often more diverse than they are in four-year universities. there's a greater percentage of women and underrepresented minorities. So that, that makes me, so the thing that we talked about at the very end about sort of stereotypes being activated, when you're the only African American in a room, or when you're one of 3 women in a class of 25, those stereotypes might be activated in a different way than if you're in a classroom where women are half of the people in the class. So some of the issues may not be as strong, would be my guess, in community colleges. But I think some of the faculty-student interaction pieces, the quality of teaching, I think those are true wherever you go.
Do you think those would be hold true at secondary level also?
Yes. Yeah, I think, I think it's the similar theory or the similar idea.
Okay, thank you. This is the last question that I have, number 4, and it said, I know I haven't had another one come in. How do you think these findings would change, okay, for community college, no. Number 5, did you look at the different instructional style for certain teachers to see if it affected responses? For example, how would they respond if the course had more of a discourse focus?
So we were not able to look at instructional styles for teachers because it was a online, mostly quantitative survey. We did ask folks to write in to a couple questions on, there's each section had a write in, so people could tell us about their professors, but we weren't really able to get any specifics to correlate those with the responses. That would be what we need to look at probably in a qualitative study or an observational study. That would be probably the most appropriate methodology for a question like that. But I think there very well may be something with instructional styles.
Okay, next question. How did you get to be one of the universities that participates in the PACE survey? And you answered a little bit of that, but maybe how did you get to be one of the universities that participates?
Yeah, so in the very first, for the first round, we started PACE in 2006, and we did use a sampling strategy for the universities. And what we did was we tried to choose universities that had first of all, they had to be what we call a one-tiered university. That means that they admit students into the major or into the department or the college basically in the first year, or they assign a department advisor or something in the first year. So it's very clear that when the student comes in, they're in engineering. For example, here at the University of Washington, that's not the main way that we do this, so UW couldn't actually participate in PACE. But after we did that, looked at only one-tiered, we looked at those schools that had either a higher than average or lower than average proportion of women and proportion of underrepresented minorities. And then we just kind of went through the list and found schools. We did sort of look for schools that had enough students in them that we could do some analysis at the institutional level. So that was how we did it for when PACE started.
Okay, thank you. I still have more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, thank you for your presentation. Some colleagues and I are interested in surveying women engineers in the field, and I think it would be of great value to look at differences in the experiences of women engineers based on race and ethnicity. How might the work of your research inform such a study?
So I'm assuming this is talking about women engineers, like in their career.
Yes,
okay.
Not in the actual women in their careers, women engineers.
Okay. So, clearly most of what I talked about today was about classroom experiences and interactions with faculty. But I think the main underlying idea, the big picture, is that women are coming from different perspectives. from different cultures, different levels, different types of socialization when they're younger. And I think that that is the key to continuing to look at this at different levels, such as women in their careers. So doing some additional background research, if the person hasn't already sort of looked at cultural expectations of different groups, I think that might be a really important part to look at to make sure you're asking the right questions in your study.
Okay, question number 8. How does your instrument compare to the engineering climate survey developed by Penn State and posted on this SWE SWE website?
I'm assuming this is talking about the Assessing Women in Engineering or Assessing Women and Men in Engineering project. There's some similarities to our instruments. I think there are similar modules. The questions are worded a bit differently. Our questions came from other surveys that we had done in the past. There's a WEPAN survey that was done. It was a pilot climate survey with many institutions, probably more than 10 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but so we built off of that study, and then there was another one that we did with NSF and built off of that climate, that instrument. So I'd have to, sit down with both of them to give you, exact differences, but I think they're very similar in overall intent.
Okay, question number 9. Were any questions asked of the teachers? Do you have data as to the race or ethnicity of the teachers? I would really like to see the makeup of the professors.
So we did not ask the teachers anything. We didn't survey them or interview them, but we do have some data on the makeup of the faculty at the schools. And that's something, that could be put together. The American Society for Engineering Education, ASEE, actually has a tool. It's called the data mining tool, which is accessible. I think it's not accessible to the general public, but I think you could request access. And it has information in it for each year and includes some information on faculty numbers by gender and race. So that is something that we've looked at, that I examined a little bit in my dissertation, and it would be really an institutional level variable if we wanted to include it in some sort of multi-level analysis, possibly.
Okay, and our last question. Although you found that African American women are comfortable asking questions in class, do you have a sense of how often they actually ask questions in class? Do you know if the students are speaking in class?
The survey doesn't ask how often they ask questions. We do ask about how often they meet with their professors, and it's not a, once a week or that kind of a scale. It's a much more generalized scale for that. And meeting with your professors is clearly a different issue than asking questions in class. There may be people who ask lots of questions in class and then never meet with their professors. So I don't know that we can correlate the two, but we do not have information about the frequency of asking questions in class.
Well, thank you. That was a good set of questions, and I certainly feel like I've learned some valuable information from the things that you've shared, and we appreciate you sharing with our community, and just wish you best of luck in your next round of research.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it, and please be in contact if you have more questions.
Well, and I want to thank all the attendees, and especially all those that stayed on for the Q&A. So, Greg, I'm turning it over to you to round up the information for everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Remember that this webinar will be available on the STEMEquityPipeline.org website under the Professional Development heading and under the STEM Equity Pipeline Archive webinar in the next few days. They'll also be available off the homepage. For everyone who has been a part of the live webinar, you will be sent an email with a link to a survey that we would like for you to answer for us. For the archived webinar, please refer back to your registration email with the link and confirmation number to the survey. Thank you. This is the end of this webinar.
Thanks again, Liz.